The sun was dying over the Dakota Territory, bleeding out across the high, flat ridges that gave Copper Butte its name. It was 1884, and the town was choking on the fine red dust of a long, dry summer. The air hung thick and still, carrying the scent of hot metal, stale beer, and tired livestock. Into this suffocating stillness, Rowena Hart walked. She came from the east, on foot, following the iron rails that stopped abruptly at the town's edge. She was tall, built with the lean, hard lines of a whipcord, and moved with a deceptive economy of motion that conserved every ounce of strength. In one hand, she carried a heavy iron valise that seemed to anchor her to the earth. The other hand rested near her hip, where an old, dark leather gun rig was tied down against her thigh. The holster was worn smooth, the grip of the revolver inside it polished by a hand that knew it intimately. Her duster was the color of the road. Her flat-brimmed hat was pulled low, shadowing a face that held no greeting. She stopped at the mouth of the main square, a wide, raw scar of packed dirt flanked by false-fronted buildings. Her eyes, gray and clear as winter water, swept the scene. The freight depot was her target, a heavy-set man in suspenders. The freight boss was yelling at two loaders struggling with a crate. Rowena crossed the square. The thud of her boots on the boardwalk was the only sound that seemed willing to challenge the oppressive quiet. She stepped up to the depot platform, setting the valise down by her feet. The landing made the wooden planks groan. It was heavier than it looked. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was low, without tremor, cutting cleanly through the thick air. "Loading or tallying, I can sign the day sheet." The freight boss, Sloan, stopped yelling. He turned, wiping a sheen of sweat and dust from his thick neck with a red bandana. He looked at the valise, at the gun, and then at the clear space where a woman's skirts ought to be, but only worn trousers were. He was about to speak when the laughter started. It began as a snort, from the porch of the Tin Locust Saloon. Directly across the square, a mule skinner, chair tilted back against the wall, lowered his whiskey glass. "Did that girl ask for loader's work, boys?" Another man, a prospector with a beard stained by tobacco, spat into the dust. "Maybe she's lost. Sloan, the kitchen's in the back." The laughter swelled, a harsh, grating sound of bored men finding easy sport. They banged their glasses on the railing. "Go on, girl, show us how you lift that valise," one yelled. "She gonna bother him to death with her eyelashes," shouted another. Rowena did not look at them. Her gaze remained fixed on the freight boss, waiting for an answer. Sloan flushed, embarrassed and angry. "We ain't hiring," he muttered, turning back to his ledger, dismissing her. "You've got 3 wagons waiting and the sun's almost gone?" Rowena stated. It was not a question. "You need the hands." "Listen, girl," Sloan snapped, turning back. "It ain't proper. There's unwritten rules. We don't sign on. Your kind. I'll take the same rate as them." She nodded to the 2 men who had stopped working to watch. "That's enough. Sloan, you're upsetting the lady?" The voice slid into the air, slick and heavy as gun oil. Sheriff Leland Crow separated himself from the saloon's shadows. He was a man who wore his authority like his coat, a long, black frock coat, too heavy for the season, buttoned tight. A silver pin, not a badge but some kind of fraternal mark, gleamed on his lapel. He stepped onto the boardwalk, rolling a toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other. He stopped a few feet from Rowena, his eyes traveling over her with a slow, appraising insolence. "Now, little lady," he drawled, "we appreciate a visitor, but Copper Butte is a working town, and the men here," he gestured to the laughing porch, "they like things just so." He smiled, but it was a cold arrangement of teeth. "The Tin Locust always needs a girl to scrub pots or tables. You show you can be behaved. Keep your mouth shut and your apron clean. Maybe Cook will let you sweep up." The porch erupted in hoots. Rowena's expression did not change. She seemed carved from the same worn wood as the boardwalk. She looked past Crow, back to Sloan. "The day sheet. I'm asking for a wage." Crow's smile vanished. The toothpick stopped moving. He had offered her a place, and she had ignored him. He hated being ignored. He looked at her gun rig, and his eyes narrowed. "A wage," he repeated, tasting the word. "You want to work like a man. You gotta prove you're worth a man's time. You look fast." He nodded at her hip. "Or is that just for show?" "It's a tool," Rowena said. "A tool," Crow laughed. A short, sharp bark. He looked to the crowd, his audience. He was performing now. "All right, girl, you want a job? We'll have a test, a little town sport before supper." He pointed across the square. An old, rusted tin can sat on the edge of a horse trough. "Orrin," he yelled. A lanky deputy, barely 20, hurried out of the saloon. "Sheriff, fetch that can. See that broken sign pole over yonder? The one by the chapel. Hang it from the crossbar. High, now. Make it sporting." The deputy did as he was told, looping a piece of twine through a hole in the can and tying it to the splintered arm of the signpost. It dangled, spinning slowly in the dying light. The laughter from the porch had quieted, replaced by a buzzing anticipation. This was better than mockery. This was a humiliation in the making. Crow turned back to Rowena. "The chapel bell," he said, "rings the 6th hour. It's due any second. You get one toll, just the one." He let the impossibility of it sink in. A single toll of a heavy iron bell was a sound, a vibration, not a duration. "You draw, fire, and hit that can clean before the sound of that first bell fades," Crow declared, his voice ringing with false generosity. "You do that, and I'll personally tell Sloan here to sign you on for a whole week." The men on the porch were on their feet, leaning over the rail. Bets were being laid in hushed tones. $5 says she don't even clear the leather." Rowena looked at the can. It was 50 yards off, a dark speck against the darkening sky. "What's the matter, girl?" Crow taunted. "Tool too heavy." He decided to give his lesson. He wanted to show her, and the town, how authority looked. "You see," he said, stepping back into the square and unbuttoning his coat to clear his own holstered pistol. "It's not about being fast. It's about being right." He began to draw his weapon, but he did it with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. He was lecturing, his hand, pale and smooth, closed over the polished grip. "It's about knowing your place, knowing who gives the orders and who takes them." His gun was out, a heavy, nickel-plated Colt, and he began to raise it toward the can. He was going to show her how it was done. He was waiting for the sound. And then it came, from the stone chapel at the end of the street. The great bell stirred. The deep, resonant brong of the first toll slammed into the square. Crow tensed, his smile widening, his finger tightening on his own trigger to fire on the bell. But the sound was split. The world compressed. Rowena Hart had not moved, and then she had. It was not a sequence of actions. It was one. Her hand did not seem to travel to the gun. It was simply at the gun. Her duster flared as her hip unlocked. The leather sang a single, sharp, ripping note as the revolver cleared the holster. The sound of the hammer clicking back was lost in the motion, consumed by the single, fluid line of her arm extending. A flash of orange fire spat from her muzzle. The crack of her pistol was so close to the bell's toll that the two sounds married, becoming one terrible, echoing report. Across the square, the tin can did not fall. It did not swing. It evaporated. One moment it was there, a dark shape. The next it was a puff of glittering, shredded metal. The twine that had held it, frayed and old, snapped from the concussion. The broken ends whipping in the sudden, violent vacuum. The echo of the shot and the bell died together, rolling out over the buttes, leaving behind a silence so total it felt like deafness. The men on the saloon porch were statues. Drinks were frozen halfway to open mouths. The $5 bet was forgotten. Sloan, the freight boss, was pale, his ledger hanging limp from his hand. Sheriff Leland Crow stood in the middle of the street, his own expensive pistol still only half raised. He hadn't even finished his lesson. His mouth was slightly open, the toothpick frozen between his lips. Rowena did not reholster immediately. She held the smoking pistol level for a half-second longer, the barrel perfectly still, before lowering it. Crow's eyes, wide with shock, snapped from the space where the can had been to her, and then to her weapon. He saw it. He was a man who knew guns, and he saw what the crowd missed. Her draw had been a blur. The hammer pulled back and the trigger squeezed in one motion. But now, as she lowered it, he saw her thumb expertly riding the hammer, controlling its descent, blocking it from falling completely, settling it back into the safe position before the gun ever touched leather. It was not fanning. It was not luck. It was perfect, terrifying control. It was the kind of handling seen only in high-stakes duels or demonstrations by masters. This was not a road-weary girl. This was a professional. The silence was broken by the sound of boot heels on dry earth. A man separated himself from the shadows by the water trough, where he had been standing unnoticed. He was not one of the saloon loafers. He wore worn denim and a clean, collarless shirt, and his hat, unlike Crow's, was shaped for work, not for show. He'd been watching the woman, not the spectacle. He walked past the frozen sheriff without a glance and stopped at the edge of the depot platform. His eyes met Rowena's, and in them, she saw no mockery, no surprise, only assessment. "I'm Asher Cole," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the heavy silence. "I own the Twin Spur Ranch." He nodded once, respectfully, toward her holstered weapon. Then his gaze flicked to the iron valise. "If you can handle freight half as well as you handle that iron," he said, "I need a hand. In the warehouse, and in the yard. Full day's wage." Rowena's arm, which had not trembled, finally relaxed. She slid the revolver home. The click of the metal settling into the leather was the only sound in the square. She did not smile. She looked at Asher Cole, this man who offered work instead of tests. She bent, and with her left hand, lifted the iron valise in one smooth motion. "I work to live, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice level, coated in the same red dust as the street. "Not for sport." She turned, ignoring Crow, and faced the stunned freight boss. "Where do I sign the day sheet?" The sun rose on Copper Butte with a dry, unforgiving heat. By the time the chapel bell tolled 7, Rowena Hart was already in the freight yard, her hat pulled low, her sleeves rolled past the elbow. The iron valise was stored in a small, windowless office Sloan had grudgingly given her. Her gun belt was cinched tight. The half-dozen men who worked the depot loaders, skinners, and tally clerks watched her from under their hat brims. The laughter of the previous evening was gone, replaced by a sullen, wary silence. They had seen the shot. Now they waited to see the fraud. They expected her to falter, to complain, to ask for the lighter tasks. Rowena went straight to the wagon that had arrived first, a heavy load of milled flour for the mercantile. She unhooked the tally sheet from the sideboard and began her count, her voice clear in the morning air. 100-pound sacks, tally of 50. Sloan, the freight boss, grunted from the loading dock. "All right, Hart, get 'em moved, stamped and stacked." One of the loaders, a burly man named Pike, no relation to the judge or the mentor, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "That's man's work, Sloan." Rowena didn't answer him. She picked up a bailing hook, tested its weight, and then walked into the wagon bed. She sank the hook into the top seam of the first sack, braced her feet, and pulled. It was 100 pounds of dead weight. But she didn't just lift. She used leverage, pivoting the sack onto her back in a single, fluid motion, her knees bending to take the strain. She walked it down the ramp, her steps even and sure, and dropped it onto the pallet, the boards groaning. She turned, grabbed the ink stamp, marked the sack, and went back for the next one. She did this 4 more times before the burly loader had finished his first. She didn't rush. She was just efficient. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. The men watched her work, the set of her shoulders, the way she coiled and uncoiled her strength. She was built for endurance, not for show. By noon, the mockery was dead. The men still didn't talk to her, but they moved aside when she passed. She was faster at tying off a load than they were, her knots tight and secure. When she took over the ledger for an hour while Sloane ate, they saw her handwriting. It was not the looping, feminine script they might have expected. It was stark, clear, and precise. Every number aligned. Every consignment noted without error. Asher Cole arrived mid-morning with a wagon of his own, empty, to pick up barbed wire and rock salt. He didn't stand by and watch. He unrolled his sleeves and began working beside her, loading the heavy spools. "You didn't have to," he said, their brief conversation shielded by the noise of the yard. "It's the job I asked for," Rowena replied, checking the shipping label. "Sloane's paying you full rate, $2 a day." He grunted as they heaved a spool over the wagon's side. "I'll cover it. You're working for me. I'll take the depot's wage," she said. "I'm working for you at the warehouse and the yard, not as a spectacle." Asher nodded, accepting it. He looked tired. There were lines around his eyes that didn't belong on a man who couldn't be much past 30. "We're short-handed at the Twin Spur," he said, as if needing to explain. "It's the drive season. We're supposed to be moving 300 head to the rail spur at Bismarck. You're not moving them?" she asked, grabbing the next roll. "Can't." His voice was tight with a frustration that had gnawed on him for weeks. "No water, not enough. Anyway, the herds are thinning out. If I move them now, I'll lose half the weight and half the contract price." He wiped sweat from his brow with his forearm. "And I'm having disputes with my neighbors over the rights to Badwater Creek." He didn't elaborate, but she heard the shadow in his voice. He was a young widower. She'd heard the men whisper. His wife taken by fever 2 winters back. He was running the ranch alone, and it was running him into the ground. The work was interrupted by a loud curse and the grinding screech of metal. The main pulley, used to hoist heavy crates up to the warehouse loft, had jammed. The rope was taut, a crate of mining equipment dangling dangerously 10 feet in the air. "It's that damned upper wheel again," Sloane yelled. "Billy, get up there and clear it." A boy, maybe 15, skinny and pale, looked up at the rigging with terror. He'd been the one to slip on the rope. He started to climb the ladder, his hands shaking. "He'll lose a finger," Rowena said, quiet. "Hold the line." She walked to the base of the hoist, ignoring Sloane's glare. She studied the mechanism. The chain had jumped the groove and was wedged against the housing. She scanned the yard, found a long iron pry bar, and started up the ladder herself. "Get down from there, Hart!" Sloane shouted. Rowena ignored him. She climbed past the frightened boy, braced herself on the beam, and examined the pulley. With one hand, she signaled to the men below. "Slack, give me 2 inches." They eased the rope. She wedged the pry bar into the housing, found her leverage, and with a short, controlled burst of strength, forced the chain back onto the wheel. It seated with a heavy clunk. "All right," she called down. "Haul away." She climbed down, tossing the pry bar onto the dust. She looked at Billy, the young helper, who was staring at her with awe. "Keep your eyes on the wheel, not on the load," she said, and walked away. She was wiping grease from her hands when Sheriff Crow appeared. He hadn't ridden up. He just materialized at the fence line, leaning against it as if he owned it. His black coat was immaculate. His toothpick was fresh. "Quite the performance, Miss Hart," he drawled, his voice loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "Hoisting, lifting, climbing. Is there anything a woman like you can't do?" The men stopped working. Asher Cole, who had been tying down his wagon, stiffened. Rowena finished cleaning her hands on a rag. "Just earning my day." "Sheriff." "Is that what you call it?" Crow pushed off the fence and took a step into the yard. His boots were polished. "Sloane, I hope you're keeping honest books. The territory's very particular about employment papers, especially for vagrant labor." The threat was clear. He was aiming at Sloane, but the shot was meant for her. "Her papers are fine," Asher Cole said, stepping forward. His voice was level, but his hand was near the axe handle on his wagon. Crow's eyes slid to Asher. He smiled. That cold arrangement of teeth again. Always the good neighbor. Cole, just making sure everyone abides by the rules. The sun is hot. Wouldn't want the lady to get overheated. It can make people unreliable. He tipped his hat, a gesture of pure mockery, and walked away. His long black coat cutting a sharp figure against the red dust. The tension broke, but the mood was sour. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of hard, punishing labor. The smells of the yard baked into the air the sharp tang of hot metal, the ammonia of mule sweat, the dry, dusty scent of hay, and the rich, earthy smell of cured leather. Rowena moved through it all, stamping manifests, weighing goods, and settling debts for teamsters passing through. She seemed to have an innate understanding of the yard's complex pulse, a woman born to the harsh rhythm of freight and labor. That night, Rowena climbed the narrow stairs to the attic room above the warehouse. It was small, hot, and smelled of burlap and old grain, a cot, a wash basin, and a crate for a table. She lit a single lantern, the small flame casting huge, dancing shadows. She pulled her iron valise from under the cot and clicked it open. It was not filled with dresses. The top tray held gunsmithing tools, fine files, bottles of oil, cleaning rods, and spare springs, all neatly organized. Beneath it, nestled in worn felt, was another revolver, a heavy dragoon model, meticulously maintained. And beside that, a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. She untied the bundle. Inside was a single, heavily creased letter. The paper was soft as cloth from years of being folded and unfolded. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was strong. She didn't need to read the whole thing. Her eyes went to the last line, the words she knew by heart. The gun is a last resort. Rowena. Never shoot if there is another way. It was signed, Eamon Pike. She was tracing the signature with her finger when a soft knock came at her door. She rewrapped the letter and closed the valise in one silent motion before calling, "It's open." Asher Cole stood in the doorway, holding a tin plate with a steaming heap of bean stew and a hunk of cornbread. He looked awkward, standing in the small, dark room. "Figured you hadn't eaten," he said. "The tin locust is loud." She took the plate. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." "Asher." He lingered in the doorway. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the wind rattling the tin roof. "You handle yourself well. In the yard, with the pulley." "My father was a railroad guard," she said, taking a bite of the stew. It was hot, rich with salt pork. "He taught me mechanics, said it was more reliable than men." Asher allowed himself a small, tired smile. He might have been right. He shifted his weight, wanting to ask, not knowing how. "You from back east?" Rowena looked down at her plate. "I've been on the rails, and under the sky." It was a non-answer, a polite closing of a door. And he was polite enough not to push. He just nodded. "Well, the work. It's good to have you here. Sloane's already said you're doing the work of two men. I'm just doing the job. Good night, Miss Hart." "Good night, Asher." He closed the door, his footsteps fading down the stairs, later, before blowing out the lantern. Rowena went downstairs to check the main warehouse locks. Sloane had given her a key, a sign of trust won with sweat, not gunfire. As she slid the heavy bolt home, her eyes caught the town notice board, illuminated by the light from the saloon across the way. It was covered in broadsheets, rewards for wanted men, notices of sale, a flyer for a traveling preacher. But one, posted just that day, was new. It was printed in sharp, black letters by the Territorial Press. Public land auction, by order of the Dakota Territorial Office. Parcels of land along Badwater Creek. Sale to be held in 10 days. Supervised by Sheriff Leland Crow. Rowena stared at the poster. The hot, still air of the warehouse suddenly felt cold. Badwater Creek. The water Asher Cole was being denied. An auction, supervised by the man who had threatened her just hours before. Her eyebrows drew together, just slightly, a fractional movement in the dark. She read the notice one more time, memorizing the date. Then she turned from the board, the faint sounds of the saloon piano fading as she pulled the heavy door shut, sealing herself inside with the silence and the weight of this new, hard piece of knowledge. The depot yard had found its new center of gravity, and it was Rowena Hart. The men who had laughed at her now watched her, their respect grudging but absolute. She worked from the 5 o'clock bell until the light failed, and she never complained. She tallied, she lifted, she tied down, and she saw everything, but the work was just the skin of the day. Her mind was on the poster in the warehouse. On the third day, Asher Cole sought her out. The morning freight was light, and he found her reinforcing the axle on a yard wagon. He watched her for a moment, the clean, efficient way she seated the bearings. "You understand mechanisms," he said. "Things make sense." Rowena replied, wiping grease from her hands. "Wood, iron, rope. They do what they're meant to do. People are harder." Asher leaned against the wagon wheel, the weariness of the past week settling on him like a shroud. "I need you to ride out with me, not for work, for an opinion." They rode north, leaving the clatter of the town behind. Climbing a low rise that overlooked the vast, grassy sweep of the Twin Spur Ranch. From the ridge, they could see the herds, dots of brown and red, clustered too tightly around the main well. Asher pointed to a dry, meandering scar in the earth that ran down from the high country. "That's my ditch," he said. "Or it was. It's fed by the spring on Elder Hollow Ridge. My father dug that channel 20 years ago. It's on my deed. It's my water. It's dry," Rowena stated. "Bone dry," Asher said, his voice hard. "About 3 weeks ago, it slowed to a trickle, and then one morning, it was just gone, stopped. Someone's damned it. High up on the ridge. Vigilantes, other ranchers." Asher shook his head, kicking at a cracked plate of dried mud. "I've had feuds, but this is different. This is organized. My cattle are drinking the well dry. They're already dropping weight, getting thin. The drive to Bismarck is in 2 weeks. If I move them like this, I'll be ruined." He looked at her, his gaze direct. "If I cannot get that water flowing before that land auction, I'll have nothing left to sell and no reason to stay. Crow knows it." "The auction," Rowena said, tasting the word. "Badwater Creek." "That's the kicker," Asher said bitterly. "Badwater Creek is my southern border. The auction is for the land north of me. Elder Hollow Ridge, the land my water comes from. Someone is choking me off, planning to buy the spring right out from under me." Rowena looked north, toward the ridge, her eyes narrowing against the sun. "You're being corralled." "Asher, I know," he said, "and I don't know how to fight it. Crow is the law." "The law," Rowena repeated, "is just a mechanism. Sometimes people just make it run backwards." She turned her horse and rode back to the depot, the pieces clicking into place. The auction, the water, the sheriff. Her work in the yard was now a cover. Her eyes, trained to see the smallest detail, began to hunt. She found her first thread that afternoon, in the depot lockup. A new shipment had arrived on the morning train, marked for the sheriff's office. 4 heavy crates, stenciled with the words "Superior Mining Tools." When she and Pike, the burly loader, went to move them, Rowena noted the discrepancies. The labels were cheap, the stenciling uneven. The brand name one she had never seen. The crates were reinforced with extra iron bands, far too sturdy for simple picks and shovels. And as they set one down, she saw the official wax seal of the Dakota Territorial Sheriff's Office pressed into the wood. Why was the sheriff receiving mining tools? And why were they guarded by his own seal? She was in the small depot office an hour later. The window cracked open to catch a breeze that never came. Her ledger was open, but she was listening. Sheriff Crow and his lanky deputy, Orrin Bale, were standing just outside. In the shade of the overhang, they thought they were alone. "The 4 crates are in the lockup," Bale said, his voice a low, nervous rumble. "See they stay there." Crow replied, his tone clipped. "Gallo and Son sent their own man to check the manifest. They want that land cleared and the equipment ready after the bidding is done. What about the map? Sheriff, the new survey. Crow was silent for a moment. Rowena could hear the sound of him chewing his toothpick. The registrar has it. He's a nervous little rabbit, but he'll do what he's told. He'll file the new names just before the auction bell rings. The original claim will be void. By the time anyone figures it out, Gallo and Sons will have the deed, and we'll have our fee. And Cole, Bale asked. Cole will be bankrupt, Crow said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. He'll be bidding on land he thinks is public, but he'll be bidding against the men who already own the water above him. He'll be finished. They moved off. Rowena did not breathe for a full 10 seconds. Gallo and Sons. New names. The registrar. The conspiracy was no longer a suspicion. It had a name. That night, she went to the Tin Locust. She did not go for whiskey, or for company. She went for the registrar. The saloon was thick with smoke, the clatter of chips, and the harsh laughter of tired men. On a small, rickety stage, a woman named Tamsin Lowe was seated at a piano, her fingers tracing a mournful melody. She began to sing, her voice a low, smoky contralto that cut through the noise, a sound of old sadness and lost roads. Rowena found a dark corner, her back to the wall, and ordered a small beer. From her vantage point, she could see the entire room, and more importantly, she could see the long, warped mirror behind the bar, which reflected the dark corner booths. She waited. An hour passed. Tamsin sang about a gambler killed in a river, her voice filling the room with a sense of inevitable loss. Then, Orrin Bale entered. He was not in his deputy's uniform. He wore range clothes, but his gun was prominent. He scanned the room, spotted his man, and walked to a booth in the far back, the registrar. A small, bird-like man in a clean shirt and wire-rimmed spectacles was already there, nursing a drink. Rowena watched in the mirror. She saw Bale sit. She saw him talk, his face hard and insistent. The registrar just nodded, looking terrified. Bale reached into his coat and, keeping his hand below the table, passed a thick envelope across. The registrar's hand, small and pale, darted out and made the envelope vanish. The bribe was paid. They stood to leave. Bale, clumsy and arrogant, hitched his gun belt and pulled his coat straight. As he did, a rolled leather tube, tucked under his arm, was dislodged. A single rolled sheet of paper slipped from the open end of the tube and fell to the dusty floor by the booth, completely unnoticed by either man. They walked out of the saloon, Bale clapping the registrar on the back. The saloon was loud. Tamsin Lowe's song reached its crescendo. No one was looking at the empty booth. Rowena moved. She did not run. She did not even look hurried. She stood, placed her empty mug on a passing tray, and walked toward the exit. Her path took her directly past the booth. She paused, as if to adjust her boot, bent low, and her hand closed on the fallen paper. She straightened and, shielding it with her body, stepped into the dark hallway that led to the latrines. Her fingers fumbled with the roll. She uncurled it just enough. It was a map, not a printed one, but a hand-drawn survey, marked with professional lines, and scrawled over it, in thick, angry red ink, were new property lines, carving up the land around Elder Hollow Ridge. She saw the familiar outline of the Twin Spur, and there, on the parcel of land that contained the spring, the original owner's name, a name she didn't recognize, was crossed out with a single, violent black stroke. Penciled in its place was the name she had heard just that afternoon, Gallo Sons Mining. This was the map. This was the fraud. Her mind worked, memorizing the lines, the names, the crude shape of the red ink. She rolled it back up. She could take it, but they would know it was gone. They would know someone was onto them. She stepped back into the main room, walked to the empty booth, and found the paper on the floor. "Looks like that fella forgot his paper," she said to the bartender, tossing the rolled map onto the center of the table, where it was plain to see. The bartender grunted, not caring. Rowena walked out of the Tin Locust, the sound of Tamsin's voice following her like a ghost. The street was dark, the moon hidden by a high rack of clouds. She kept to the shadows, moving quickly toward the depot, She was halfway across the square when the sound of a hoof on packed dirt made her stop. Sheriff Crow was there, mounted on his black horse, blocking the path. He was a shadow against the dim light of the stars. Taking a late walk, Miss Hart. His voice was unnervingly soft, carrying a silk-smooth menace. Couldn't sleep, she said. Her hand was loose, her duster unbuttoned. Crow leaned forward in his saddle, the leather creaking like a coffin lid. His face was a pale oval in the dark. You're an interesting woman. You appear from nowhere. You outdraw me in my own town, and you do the work of 3 men. It makes a man curious. Nothing to be curious about. Sheriff, I'm just a woman looking for a day's wage. Is that all? He rode his horse closer, forcing her to step back. He was testing her, probing. I've been using the telegraph, sending out inquiries. It's a funny thing, but the wires are quiet. No one seems to have ever heard of a Rowena Hart. It's like you didn't exist before you stepped off that train line. Rowena stood her ground. It's a big country. Sheriff, a lot of roads. Easy to get lost. It's also a small one, Crow said, his voice dropping. For people who run, people who have a past, people who poke their nose into business that isn't theirs. He smiled, though she could barely see it. This territory is a hard place. It chews up strays. He held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then, satisfied he had delivered his warning, he reined his horse back, turning it in a tight circle. You sleep well, Miss Hart. You work so hard. Wouldn't want you to burn out. He trotted away, leaving her alone in the square. She watched him go, her heart hammering, not with fear, but with a cold, clear certainty. He was warning her off. He suspected she was more than she seemed. And now, she knew what he was. She did not go to her cot. Sleep was impossible. She went to the stable, saddled one of the yard mules, and rode out of town, following the dry ditch north under the cover of darkness. She found the dam just as the first gray light of dawn touched the ridges. It was not a pile of rocks. It was a professionally built blockade of new, raw timber, expertly notched and joined, sealed with tar and packed earth. It was a piece of engineering, built to last, built to kill a ranch. She dismounted and walked the length of it, feeling the cuts in the wood. Her fingers traced the impact marks left by the sledgehammers, and she found it, a repeated, distinctive mark on the head of every major bolt, a small, crescent-shaped chip in the steel of the hammer that had driven them, leaving its unique signature in the wood. This was not a random act. This was planned. This was evidence. She stood on the dam, the captured water of the spring pooling silently behind it, a placid, dark mirror reflecting the new day. The anger in her was a cold, sharp thing. She could feel the weight of her gun, a familiar comfort. She could wait. She could find the men who guarded this place and solve the problem with lead. It would be simple. It would be fast. But the words from Eamon Pike's letter echoed in her head. Never shoot if there is another way. A gun was an ending. It was not a solution. A gun wouldn't fix the map. A gun wouldn't expose the bribes. It wouldn't stop Gallo and Sons. It would only make her a target. She would gather the proof. The map she had seen, the crates in the lockup, the hammer marks, the overheard conversation. She would fight Crow, but not with his methods. She would use the law he was paid to uphold. Rowena Hart turned her mule away from the stolen water and rode back to Copper Butte, the sun rising at her back, illuminating the hard, cold path she would have to walk, the whistle of the 3 o'clock freight. A long, mournful cry in the dark pulled Rowena from a fitful doze. She lay on the narrow cot in her attic room, the hot, grain-scented air pressing down on her. The train was miles away, but the sound traveled clean and sharp through the dry Dakota night, a reminder of the iron spine that connected this raw territory to the world she had left behind. It was the sound of trains that always brought the memories. She closed her eyes, and she was no longer in the depot attic. She was 14, standing in a dusty rail yard in Kansas, the sun hot on her neck. A man named Eamon Pike was standing beside her, his voice as worn and comfortable as old leather. Again, he'd said. She'd drawn the heavy, unbalanced pistol he'd given her. No, he'd said, not unkindly. He placed his calloused hand over hers, forcing the pistol down. You are not a brawler, Rowena. You are not pulling a knife in a bar fight. You are a surgeon. You are ending a conversation, and you must be absolutely certain there is no other word to be said. He took the gun from her. You do not think of the target. You do not think of the man. You think of the 4 points. It is a prayer. Draw, lock, breathe, squeeze. He'd made her practice for 1,000 hours. The draw, not for speed, but for smoothness. So the motion became part of her. The lock, the alignment of the sights until they became a single, clear thought. The breath, letting half of it out, finding the still, quiet place in her lungs. And the squeeze, a steady, controlled pressure. So the explosion was almost a surprise. Eamon Pike had taught her the gun as a burden, not a tool. He'd taught her that to take a life was to take the last word, and a person had better be righteous in that finality. The train whistle cried again, lower this time, and the memory shifted. The prayer of Eamon Pike faded, replaced by a scream. Not Eamon's voice, but the shriek of metal brakes on a hot track. She was 16. Her father, Cyrus Hart, was a guard for the Union Pacific Line, a good man who believed in the schedule and the safety of the mail. He'd been proud of his run, proud of his uniform. That day, he'd sensed trouble. He'd hidden her in the mail car, behind the heavy canvas bags, and told her not to make a sound. No matter what. The train stopped. It was not a scheduled stop. She remembered the smell of sulfur and gun smoke, the splintering of the passenger car door, shouts, the thud of boots on the gravel outside. She'd peeked through a tear in the canvas, her heart a cold stone in her chest. The men who boarded the car were not common bandits. They wore strange, long dusters and hats adorned with the ragged pelts of foxes. They moved with a disciplined, brutal efficiency. Led by a tall man in a clean, dark coat, he was giving orders. She saw him pistol whip a passenger who was too slow to hand over a valise. She saw the gun he used. Even in the dim light of the car, it flashed. It was not a standard army issue. It was nickel-plated, expensive, with a grip of white pearl. And as he turned, the light from the window caught the silver inlay on the grip. 2 letters, entwined. L.C. She heard her father's voice from the platform. This is a mail car, federal property. You will stand down. She heard the tall man laugh. A single shot. Not the heavy boom of her father's rifle, but the sharp, clean crack of the pearl-handled pistol. Then silence. The Fox Pelt gang rode off with 3 sacks of payroll, leaving her father on the platform. His belief in the law and his duty bleeding out into the Kansas dust. When Eamon Pike found her 2 days later, the girl was gone. All that was left was a cold, quiet rage and a perfect, terrible memory of a nickel-plated gun. Eamon had finished her training. He'd made her a master. For a year, she'd tried to use it. She joined a traveling sharpshooting show. Mademoiselle Rowe, the girl wonder. She'd shot cigars from a man's mouth, split playing cards at 30 yards. But she left after 6 months. The crowds, she realized, were not paying for her skill. They were paying for the chance of her failure. They were paying to see blood, to see the cigar explode too close to the man's face, to see the bullet go wide. It was just another kind of blood sport. So she'd vanished, taking her father's place in the rhythm of the rails, but on the other side. She worked in freight yards, tallying and loading, moving from one dusty town to the next, her iron valise holding her past, her gun belt holding her future. And she listened. In the rail towns, in the teamster camps, she heard the stories, whispers of a land grab scheme, of homesteaders burned out, of water rights stolen. The rumors always centered on a shadowy figure, a lawman who used forged documents and intimidation to clear land for big money interests from the East. The stories were vague, the name always shifting. Sometimes they called him the Land Crow. Sometimes, just by his initials, L.C. The stories had been ghosts. They were just whispers on the wind, a cold echo of the man who had murdered her father, until Copper Butte, until she saw the notice for the land auction, until she saw the name on the supervisor's line, Sheriff Leland Crow, until she saw him in his long black coat, his authority a weapon, his smile a threat, until she'd overheard the name Gallo and Sons and saw the forged map. The pattern was the same. The methods were the same. The initials were the same. Was it the same man? The tall, cold leader of the Fox Pelt gang, or just another vulture with the same name? Rowena sat up on the cot. The attic room was stifling. This was not a blind. Hot need for revenge. That, Eamon had warned her, was just another way to miss the target. This was something colder. This was the drawing of a map, the alignment of pieces. Leland Crow was a bully who used the law as a club. Asher Cole, the man who had offered her a job instead of a joke, was the one being beaten. Protecting the Twin Spur was not a detour from her past. It was the only way to face it. She would not let another good man be crushed by that same shadow. She would not let LC win again. Her father's death was a cold, hard fact. But Asher Cole's life, his ranch, his promise, that was still a fight that could be won. She would save the ranch, and in doing so, she would pull this corrupt sheriff and his entire rotten network into the light. She would have the truth. She couldn't stay in the small room. She grabbed her gun belt, strapping it on over her simple nightshirt and trousers. She needed air. She walked downstairs, the depot silent and dark, and stepped out onto the loading dock. The town was asleep. Save for a single light in the saloon, the moon was a pale sliver, offering just enough light to see the outline of the buttes. Couldn't sleep either. Asher Cole's voice came from the shadows at the end of the dock. He was sitting on a stack of feed sacks, his hat in his hands. "The train," she said, joining him. "It's a lonely sound." "It used to be a hopeful one," he said. He looked exhausted. "My wife, Sarah, she always loved to hear it. She said it meant we weren't alone out here, that the world was still connected to us." He was quiet for a long time. Rowena sat, leaving a respectful space between them. The night breeze was cool, carrying the scent of sage. "She died 2 winters ago," Asher said, his voice flat, worn smooth by a grief he had carried alone for too long. "Mountain fever. It was fast. The doctor couldn't get here in time. One day she was hanging laundry, singing. 3 days later, I was digging." He stopped. Rowena did not speak. She just sat, a silent witness in the dark. "I built this place for her," he whispered. "The whole ranch. She wanted a home," she said, "not just a piece of dirt, but a decent place, a place where things were fair, where you could look at your hands at the end of the day and be proud of what they'd built." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth. In the dim light, she could see it was a simple white cotton handkerchief, worn thin but kept clean. "She gave me this when we were married," he said, not looking at her, just staring at the object in his hand. "She said it was to remind me of my promise, to build that decent house, to be a good man." He clenched his fist around it. "And now I'm losing it all. I'm failing her. This fight with Crow. I'm not a gunman. Miss Hart, I'm a rancher. I don't know how to fight this." He looked at her then, his eyes pleading. Not for help, but for understanding. Rowena looked at this man, his decent, hard-working hands, his honest grief. She saw her father in him. She saw every homesteader who had ever been cheated by a man with a badge and a stolen pen. The silence between them stretched, thick with all the words they could not say. It was a silence that spoke of loss, of promises, and of the crushing weight of the past. Finally, Rowena spoke, her voice low and certain. "You are not failing her, Asher." He looked up, surprised by the sudden, hard conviction in her tone. "This isn't a fight you started," she continued. "It's a sickness, and Crow is the one spreading it. He's not just taking your water. He's done this before, in other towns, to other people. He steals with paper and seals it with fear. I've seen the map. I've heard him giving the orders. He's going to steal that spring and sell it to Gallo and Sons. And he's using his badge to make it legal? Asher's face hardened. Then it's hopeless. He is the law. No, Rowena said. She stood up. He's just a man, and he's made a mistake. He left a trail. She looked out at the dark square, toward the sheriff's office. My teacher taught me a lesson, she said, her voice barely a whisper, quoting the words that were her only creed. Only shoot when there is no other way. This whole time, I've been running. But here, there is another way. We don't have to beat him to the draw. We have to beat him to the truth. We gather the evidence. We expose him. Asher stood slowly, tucking the white handkerchief back into his pocket, as if putting his promise away for safekeeping. I hate it. Rowena, I hate all of it. The guns, the threats. Sarah, she deserved peace. That's what we're fighting for, Rowena said, turning to face him. Not for revenge, for peace, for a decent home. Asher looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her gray eyes. He saw the gun at her hip, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He saw it for what it was, the last word, and he knew she was doing everything in her power not to use it. He put his hat back on, his shoulders straightening. I'm not a gunman, but this is my home. He nodded, a single, sharp gesture. I'll stand with you. If it comes to it, I'll stand. The wind came 2 nights later, a high, thin scream from the north. It was a hot, dry wind, smelling of dust and distance, rattling the tin roofs of Copper Butte and sending tumbleweeds racing like ghosts down the empty square. Rowena was in her attic room, cleaning her revolver by the light of a single lantern. She had refused Asher's offer of a room at the ranch house, preferring the depot. It was her post. It was neutral ground. Asher was at the Twin Spur, sleeping the fitful sleep of a worried man. The wind moaned around the eaves of his house, a constant, abrasive presence that made the timbers groan. It was the wind that covered the sound of hoofbeats. It was the wind that masked the scrape of a heavy timber being dropped into the iron brackets of the main stable door. Rowena smelled it first. She stopped her work. The oiled rag held motionless over the cylinder. The air coming through the open attic vent was wrong. It wasn't just dust. It was sharp, pungent. It was coal oil, snake oil, the cheap, volatile accelerant. And under it, the first faint wisp of wood smoke. She didn't pause to think. She was down the stairs and out of the depot in seconds, her gun belt in her hand, buckling it as she ran. The Twin Spur was a mile north of town. She ran. She ran with the long, ground-eating stride of someone who knows that seconds are all that matter. She was halfway there when the sky bloomed. A dull orange glow suddenly ignited against the dark clouds, and the sound of the wind was joined by a new, terrible roar. By the time she reached the ranch yard, the main stable was an inferno. Flames licked 20 feet into the sky, a churning pillar of fire that turned the night to a hellish day. She heard Asher's voice, raw with panic, yelling from the far side, "The door, it's barred, I can't." She sprinted around the structure. He was there, throwing his entire weight against the massive, sliding barn door. It didn't budge. A heavy railroad tie had been dropped into the outer brackets, sealing it tight. "It's oiled," Asher yelled, his face a mask of soot and terror. "They poured it along the whole wall." Inside, the horses were screaming. It was a sound of pure, primal terror that ripped through the roar of the fire. "The hinges," Rowena shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. She looked around, her eyes scanning the yard, which was lit like a stage by the dark shape of the forge. She saw it, a long, heavy iron crowbar. She grabbed it. "Back!" Asher stumbled away from the door. Rowena didn't try to pry the bar. She reversed the crowbar, using the heavy, tampered end as a ram. She slammed it against the top hinge, not the metal, but the thick wood that held it to the frame. The wood cracked. She hit it again, a sound like a pistol shot. The wood splintered. She reversed the bar, jammed the forked end into the brake, and put her entire weight on it. With a shriek of tortured metal and splintering oak, the top hinge tore free from the frame. The door sagged, held only by the bottom. "Again!" Asher yelled. catching her thought. They both slammed their boots against the weakened panel. The bottom hinge gave, and the entire door, a 12-foot sheet of burning timber, collapsed inward, vanishing into the blaze. A wave of heat and black, suffocating smoke blasted out, driving them to their knees. The scene inside was chaos. The stalls were exploding, the panicked horses kicking the wooden partitions to splinters. "The trough!" Rowena yelled, pointing to the water trough for the yard stock. She grabbed a heavy wool blanket from a nearby fence rail, plunged it into the water, and threw the soaking, heavy thing over her own head and shoulders. "Get the others clear if they come out." She ran. She ran into the burning building, the wet blanket smoking, her hat pulled low. She could barely see, her lungs seizing. The led mare, Asher's own mount, was trapped in the first stall, rearing and striking the wall. Rowena ripped the wet blanket from her own back and, in one fluid motion, threw it over the mare's head, covering her eyes, muffling the roar. The horse, suddenly blind and deaf to the worst of it, quieted for a priceless second, trembling violently. Rowena pulled her belt knife, slashed the leather-led rope, and grabbed the mare's halter. "Easy," she hissed, her voice a low command. "Easy. Walk with me. Walk." She didn't pull. She led. She was a point of calm in the inferno. The mare, trusting the firm hand more than her own terror, followed. The other horses, their animal instincts screaming to follow the lead, broke from their stalls and followed the mare. Rowena emerged from the smoke, coughing, her hair singed, leading a train of terrified animals into the yard. "Asher," she choked, pulling the mare toward the far corral. "Where is Asher?" He wasn't there. She looked around, her eyes smarting. Then she saw him. He was on the roof. He had scrambled up the ladder to the hayloft, desperate to save the upper level, to stop the fire from spreading to the house just 50 yards away. He was on the steep pitch of the shingled roof, a bucket in his hand, a tiny, futile figure against the towering flames. "Asher, get down!" she screamed. "The roof is going. The trusses!" he yelled back, his voice thin. I can cut the—" He never finished. The heart of the fire below him, fed by the dry hay and the accelerant, exploded. The main beam, its integrity gone, snapped with the sound of a cannon. The entire roof structure groaned, sagged, and then collapsed inward, sending a volcano of sparks, embers, and burning hay into the sky. Asher cried out, the section of roof he was on dropping from under him. He slid, his boots finding no purchase on the hot, slick shingles. He dropped the bucket and grabbed the ridgeline. Stopping his fall, he was dangling, 20 feet above the ground, his legs kicking over the roaring fire now consuming the loft. The ladder was gone, swallowed by the flames. Rowena ran, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't go for the wall. She ran to the open patch of ground just clear of the foundation, a patch of straw that was already dotted with burning cinders. "Asher!" she shouted, bracing herself. "Let go, jump!" He looked down, his face pale with the realization. He couldn't hold on. The heat was melting the soles of his boots. "Jump!" He let go. He fell, a dead weight. Rowena, anticipating his trajectory, moved to intercept him. She didn't try to catch him. She knew she couldn't. She braced for the impact, turning her shoulder, trying to absorb the force. He hit her like a dropped sack of grain. The collision was brutal. Her head snapped back, his arm crashing against her chest, driving the air from her lungs. They both went down, tumbling hard over the rough ground, rolling through the patch of smoldering straw. They came to a stop in a heap of tangled limbs, soot and burning hay. For a second, they just lay there, stunned. The wind knocked out of both of them. The straw was burning, clinging to their clothes. They scrambled, beating at the small flames on each other's shirts, coughing, gasping for air in the smoky yard. Asher's arm was still locked around her shoulder, her hand still fisted in the front of his shirt from the impact. They were alive, a sound, sharp and clear, cut through the fire's roar hoofbeats, moving fast, away from the ranch. Asher scrambled to his feet, pulling Rowena with him. "They're still here." They looked past the inferno, toward the ridge that overlooked the ranch. 3 riders were silhouetted against the glowing sky, pausing to look back at their work. One was lanky, his shape unmistakable even at a distance. Deputy Orrin Bale. The other 2 were strangers, broad-shouldered men who sat their horses like they were paid for it. One of them raised a hand, as if in salute, and they spurred their horses, vanishing over the ridge. "Did you see him?" Asher was shaking, not with fear, but with a pure, white-hot rage. "Did you see that was Bale?" "I saw him," Rowena said, her voice a low growl. She was scanning the ground near the ruined stable doors. "They left their calling card," she pointed. The heavy timber they had used to bar the door was still there, smoking. It hadn't been a random railroad tie. It was a solid, milled piece of oak, and burned deep into one end was an official brand, a circle containing the letters DCTO, Dakota County Territorial Office, property of Copper Butte Sheriff. It was a piece of arrogance, a signature. "That's not all," Asher said, his voice grim. He kicked at a spot near the back wall, where the oil had been thickest. A small, canvas-wrapped packet lay in the dirt, the edges singed but the contents intact. A coil of slow-match fuse lay beside it. Rowena picked it up, her hands careful. She unwrapped the canvas. It was a tight brick of blasting powder. "Dynamite," she said. "The fuse must have failed. They didn't just want a fire. Asher, they wanted to level this barn. They wanted to wipe you out." Asher looked at the branded timber, at the dynamite in her hand, and then at the smoking ruin of his stable. His life's work. "I'm done," he said, his voice cold. "I'm riding to Bismarck at first light. I'm taking this to the territorial marshal. I have proof. I have witnesses." "No!" Rowena rewrapped the powder. "You have nothing?" "Nothing," he cried. "I have the dynamite. I have the timber we both saw Bale. And Crow will say the timber was stolen from his woodpile 2 weeks ago," Rowena said, her voice sharp, cutting through his anger. "He'll have a report to prove it. He'll say Bale was on patrol, chasing horse thieves, and saw your fire from a distance. He'll say you set it, that you planted this powder to blame him. He'll say you're desperate. He controls every piece of paper in this town. Asher, he will bury you." "Then what do we do?" Asher yelled, spreading his hands in desperation. "What? We just let him win." "We let him think he's winning," she said. "We gather the proof he can't deny. This is part of it, but it's not all of it." The fire burned until dawn. By the time the first gray light touched the smoke, the stable was gone, leaving only a black, smoking skeleton of charred beams. The townspeople came, drawn by the pillar of smoke. They came in 1s and 2s, carrying buckets of water, though it was far too late. Sloan from the depot, Pike, the loader, even Tamsin Lowe, her saloon dress covered by a plain shawl, a basket of biscuits and a pot of coffee in her hands. They saw Asher, his face a mask of grief and soot. And they saw Rowena Hart standing beside him. Her trousers were burned through at the knees, her hands were blistered, her face was black. She looked like a soldier who had just walked out of a battle. The men who had laughed at her just days before now quietly offered her a cup of coffee. The whispers were gone. The ridicule was gone. They looked at her, then at the ruin. And they understood. Reverend Booker Lane, a kind man with a weathered face, put a hand on Asher's shoulder and bowed his head, saying a quiet prayer for the lost animals and the preservation of the house. And then, as if summoned, another rider appeared. Sheriff Leland Crow trotted up, his black coat immaculate. His boots shined. He looked rested. He dismounted, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice deep with false sympathy. "A terrible tragedy. I saw the smoke from town." He walked the perimeter of the ruin, his hands clasped behind his back. "This wind is a curse. A spark from the forge. Perhaps you must be devastated." "It was no accident." "Sheriff," Asher said, his voice a low growl. Crow stopped and turned, raising a single, concerned eyebrow. "No horse thieves, then vagrants. His eyes slid, just for a moment, to Rowena. You must be careful who you hire. Cole, desperate people do desperate things. He walked closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. This is a hard lesson. Asher, a man alone, it's a heavy burden. You're stretched thin. Maybe this is a sign. He put a paternalistic hand on Asher's arm. I have an investor, a solid man from Gallo & Sons. He's authorized me to make you a fair offer. Sell me the water rights to that strip along Badwater Creek. Just the creek. It will give you enough capital to rebuild this barn twice over. It will take this pressure off you. Let me offer you some protection. The offer hung in the smoky air, foul and thick. He was offering to buy the land he had just tried to destroy. Asher's hands clenched, his knuckles white. He was shaking, on the verge of lunging at the man. Before he could move, Rowena stepped forward. She placed herself just between the two men, a physical barrier. Her face was still black with soot, her hair matted with ash, but her gray eyes were clear and cold as ice. She looked directly at Crow, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you for the offer, Sheriff," she said, her voice quiet, but it carried across the yard with absolute clarity. "We can protect our own home." The embers of the Twin Spur stable smoked for 2 full days, a constant, acrid reminder of the attack. The townsfolk who had helped, led by Sloan and the men from the depot, had formed a bucket brigade to save the nearby house. They had succeeded, but the barn, the heart of the ranch's working life, was a charcoal skeleton. Asher and Rowena worked side by side, their hands raw, sifting through the wreckage. They salvaged what they could, a few scorched tools, a set of iron harnesses, the heavy anvil from the forge. They said little. The shared, bone-deep exhaustion and the cold, simmering rage formed a bond stronger than words. On the 3rd night, after the last of the town helpers had gone, Asher stood, his back aching, and looked at the ruins silhouetted against a sky just beginning to show its first stars. "I can't look at this anymore," he said, his voice rough with soot and fatigue. "Not tonight. Ride with me." He didn't say where. Rowena simply nodded, pulled her hat low, and followed him to the 2 remaining horses they had tied near the house. They rode south, away from the ranch, away from the smell of smoke. The air, as they moved, became clean and cool, filled with the sharp scent of pine and the damp, loamy smell of the earth. The high, thin wind of the past days had died, leaving a profound, healing stillness. A sliver of a new moon hung over the dark line of the ridges, casting just enough pale light to turn the prairie to silver and shadow. Asher led them to the banks of Badwater Creek, the very water that was the heart of the dispute. Here, it was wide and shallow, moving slowly over a bed of smooth stones. The sound of it was a gentle, constant whisper, a sound of life, the complete opposite of the fire's roar. He dismounted and tied his horse to a low-hanging willow. He walked to the water's edge and just stood, breathing. Rowena dismounted and stood a few feet behind him, giving him the space he needed. She waited, her gaze on the dark, moving water, her hands aching. After a long minute, he turned. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the pale, forgiving moonlight. Her work shirt, the one she'd worn since the fire, was torn at the shoulder, the sleeves singed. Her face was streaked with a mixture of sweat, dirt, and fine, gray ash. Her hands, resting at her sides, were blistered and black. She still carried the faint, sharp smell of the smoke, a smell that had become part of her. "You never stopped," he said, his voice quiet, filled with a wonder that was almost painful. "You ran into it. For my horses. For me. We were in it together," she said simply. "No." He shook his head, taking a small step closer. "I was on the roof, being a fool. You were on the ground, being a savior. You have soot." He said it as if it were a revelation. He reached up, his hand hesitating for a second, a question in the small space between them. Rowena did not move. She did not flinch or back away. She just watched him, her gray eyes clear, letting him decide, slowly. as if handling something infinitely fragile. He raised his hand to her face. His thumb, rough and calloused from the ranch work, hovered over her cheekbone. She could feel the warmth of his skin before he even touched her. He brushed at a dark smudge, but it was ground in. He stopped, frustrated by his own roughness. He pulled off his work gloves, stuffing them into his back pocket. Then he reached for the bandana around his neck, a simple blue cotton cloth, and untied it. He folded it carefully into a clean square. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She gave a single, almost imperceptibly small nod. He lifted the cloth, his touch impossibly gentle. He held her jaw with one hand, his fingers firm but not confining, and with the cloth in the other, he slowly, carefully, wiped the worst of the soot from her cheek. His eyes never left hers. Rowena stood perfectly still. No one had touched her with such tenderness in her entire adult life. Not since Eamon, not since her father. Her whole body was tensed for a fight, for a threat, for the need to be faster, stronger. But this was not a threat. It was the opposite. She could feel the walls she had built, the hard, iron-bound defenses, begin to tremble. He finished, his hand lingering, his thumb now brushing her clean skin. The space between them had vanished. They were breathing the same air, their bodies just inches apart. The sound of the creak seemed to swell, filling the silence, matching the sudden, heavy rhythm in her chest. His eyes were dark, filled with questions, with gratitude, and a dawning, respectful hunger. But he did not push, he did not demand. He waited. Rowena's eyes flicked from his, down to his wrist. In the moonlight, she saw it clearly, a long, angry red scratch, from his wrist to his forearm, where a piece of roofing tile had grazed him during the fall. Her left hand, the one not resting near her gun, came up. She did not think. She acted. Her fingers, blistered and stained, lightly touched the wound. He winced, just slightly. "Sorry," she murmured. "It's nothing." He breathed, but her hand did not pull away. Her touch, which could be so hard, so efficient, became something else. Her fingertips, rough as they were, traced the line of the scratch. A slow, delicate glide that was a question, a comfort, and a thank you, all in one. You fell, but you are here. You are alive. That simple, healing touch broke the last of his restraint. Asher's arm came up, his hand sliding around her back, his fingers spreading wide over her shoulder blade. He didn't pull her, didn't crush her. He just held her. A solid, encompassing touch that offered support, not possession. He drew her in, just slightly, and bent his head. He rested his forehead against hers. Rowena's eyes closed. His other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking the line of her jaw. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A long, shuddering sigh that released the tension of the fire, the fear of the fall, the constant, grinding weight of the fight. She was leaning on him. For the first time, she was letting her weight rest on someone else, and he was not buckling. He was solid as the earth beneath them. His heart was hammering against his ribs. She could feel it, or perhaps it was hers. She couldn't tell. Their breathing was in sync, their foreheads pressed together, their world reduced to this single point of contact. The smell of pine and the sound of the water. He tilted his head, a fraction of an inch. His lips brushed hers, so lightly it was barely a touch. A question. Rowena's hand, the one that had traced his wound, slid up. It moved over his chest, over the coarse material of his shirt, until it rested flat over his heart. She felt the heavy, steady beat beneath her palm, a confirmation of the life she had helped save. She pressed, just slightly, and leaned into him. That was his answer. The kiss came. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a saloon story. It was like a warm, slow wind, a deep drink of clean water after days of thirst. It was soft, it was slow, it was, above all, respectful. It was a kiss of profound relief. His lips were chapped, tasting faintly of salt and dust, but they were warm, and they were gentle. He kissed her as if he were memorizing her, as if he had all the time in the world, as if this one act could heal the burns and wash away the soot. Rowena, who had lived her life by the gun, by the hard rule of survival, felt herself soften. She melted into the embrace, her hand clutching his shirt, her other arm sliding around his waist, holding on. He deepened the kiss, just slightly, a mutual, gentle exploration, and his arm tightened around her, pulling her flush against him, finally, in a solid, unshakable embrace. They stood there for a long time, locked together. The world and its dangers crow, the auction, the stolen water receding to a distant murmur, lost in the sound of the creek. When they finally broke, they did not pull apart. They just eased back, their foreheads touching again, their breath mingling. A small, rusty sound came from Rowena's throat. It was a laugh. It was quiet, and it was rough from disuse, but it was real. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, a sight Asher had never seen. "What is it?" he murmured, his hands still framing her face. I feel weak," she confessed, the admission costing her more than the fight in the barn. "I let my guard down. It's not weakness, Rowena," he said, his voice thick. It's just being human. It's all right. I've got you." For the first time in her memory, she believed it. She believed that to be vulnerable was not to be in danger. They stood, leaning against each other, shoulders touching, more comfortable than either of them had been in years. The romantic tension had eased, replaced by a warm, solid companionship. "We'll have to rebuild," Asher said, his voice practical again. But the weariness was gone. He was looking at the water, but seeing the future. "The whole barn, from the foundation. You'll need timber," Rowena said, her mind clicking back into its practical groove. "Good. Seasoned pine, not the green wood they're using for that dam. I know a mill up in the Black Hills," he said. "If I can get the money. We'll need new hands. 2 good men, men we can trust." "Sloane's men trust you," Rowena said. "They came. They helped. They came for you," he corrected her, squeezing her hand. "But they'll stay for the ranch. We'll build it better, with a safer forge and a new loft." He paused, and a small smile touched his own lips. "And I'll add that kitchen wing to the house, the one I promised Sarah, with a big window, one that looks out over this creek, a kitchen that smells like cornbread and apple pie." He looked at her, and the question was there, unspoken. A house with a kitchen, a home. Rowena did not answer with words. She had never been good with words that were not practical. She stood up from the rock, and he stood with her. She kept his hand, lacing her fingers with his. It was a new, strange, and deeply comforting feeling. Her small, calloused hand, lost in his larger, stronger one. They stood together on the bank, side by side, a single, solid shape in the moonlight. They looked at the dark, restless water, the lifeblood of the land. It was a silent promise, stronger than any oath, sealed not in a church, but on the banks of a contested creek, in the shadow of a ruin. They would rebuild, they would fight, they would build a home. The bond forged at the creek bank was a quiet, solid thing. It had no words, but it changed the air between them. The next morning, in the pre-dawn chill of the depot office, the easy companionship was gone, replaced by a tense, focused energy. The auction was in 6 days. The fire had been an escalation. Crow was done waiting. "He tried to burn you out," Rowena said, her voice flat. She was looking at the charred brand from the sheriff's office timber, now sitting on her small desk. "When that failed, he tried to buy you out. His next move will be to simply take it." "The auction," Asher said. He was pacing the small room, his hands clenched. "He'll use that auction to legalize the theft. You saw the map. He's already given my water to Gallo and Sons." "We saw the map," Rowena corrected him. "We don't have it. We have a piece of burned wood and a failed stick of dynamite. It's not enough. A jury will see a desperate rancher trying to frame a popular sheriff. So what's left? Rowena, a gunfight. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "No." Her voice was cold. "The ledger, the map we saw was a copy. A plan. The real fraud is in the land registrar's office, in the official county ledger book. He has to change the names there to make the auction legal." "That's impossible," Asher said, stopping. "The registrar's office is attached to the sheriff's. Crow's own office is 10 feet away. He's got bail or another deputy posted there day and night. It's a fortress." Rowena looked out the window at the town, which was just beginning to stir. "Then we need someone who can walk through the front door, or knows a back one." Asher's brow furrowed. "Tamsin Lowe." Rowena turned. "The singer. She's not just a singer. She's part of this town, deeper than most. I've seen her talking to the registrar. Marcus, he looks scared of her, or maybe for her." Rowena remembered the woman's voice, that deep, mournful contralto. She remembered her arriving at the fire with coffee and biscuits, her eyes hard and knowing. "It's a risk," Rowena said. "It's all a risk." Asher replied. That night, Rowena did not go to the saloon's main room. She went to the back alley, to the stage door, and waited. When Tamsin Lowe stepped out for a breath of air between songs, she found Rowena standing in the shadows, not as a threat, but as a silent question. "You sing sad songs," Rowena said. Tamsin's eyes, dark and intelligent, appraised her. "This is a sad town, Miss Hart." She wasn't surprised to see her. "You are the only interesting thing that's happened here since the silver ran out." "Sheriff Crow is forging documents in the land office," Rowena said, wasting no time. "He's stealing Asher Cole's water to sell to a mining company. He's going to ruin him, and the ranch." Tamsin looked away, her painted lips tightening. "And you, the gunslinger. You're going to stop him." "I'm going to expose him," Rowena corrected. "To do that, I need to see the registrar's ledger. Tonight." Tamsin let out a long, slow breath. The sound of the piano, played badly by a drunk, trickled from inside. "Marcus, the registrar, he's my cousin, my mother's sister's boy." "He's not a bad man. He's just a weak one. Crow caught him skimming from the fees. Just a few dollars. Now Crow owns him. He's forcing Marcus to forge the land titles. It's killing him." She turned, her gaze fierce. "I hate Crow. He's a sickness. But if you're caught, he'll hang Marcus with you." "I won't be caught," Rowena said. Tamsin studied her for a long moment. The woman who had faced down Crow, who had run into a burning building. She made a decision. "The building is old," Tamsin said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When they built the new sheriff's office, they joined the two buildings. The registrar's office used to be a storage room for this saloon. There's a hallway." She led Rowena inside, to the small, cluttered room backstage. She pointed to a tall, locked piano closet. "This is just a false front. Behind it is the old connecting hallway. They boarded it up, but not well. It leads to the back wall of the registrar's office." She produced a small, ornate key from a chain around her neck. "I have the key. I use it to be alone sometimes. You can get in, but bail is in the front office. You'll have to be a ghost." "We need a distraction," Rowena said, her mind working. The mechanism of the plan locking into place. Something to keep their eyes on the street. The plan was set in an hour. Just before midnight, the quiet of Copper Butte was broken by the rumble of a heavy freight wagon and a string of loud, angry curses. Asher Cole, his hat pulled low, was trying to back the wagon into the narrow alley between the saloon and the land office. "I've got a late delivery for the saloon," he yelled at the deputy, who poked his head out. "Case of wine from Bismarck. Do it tomorrow. Cole, you're making a racket." "It's paid for," Asher yelled back. And then, with a loud crack, the wagon lurched and tipped. "Damnation, the axle, it split." The heavy wagon now sat at a drunken angle, its bulk completely blocking the alley, and, more importantly, blocking any view of the land office's rear windows from the sheriff's side. Asher began to yell, cursing his luck, his voice a perfect, loud cover. At the same moment, Tamsin Lowe unlocked the piano closet. She and Rowena pulled the false back panel away, revealing a dark, narrow space that smelled of dust and mice. "Be careful," Tamsin whispered, her hand on Rowena's arm. Rowena nodded. A small lantern, a notebook, and a set of her father's fine tools in a belt pouch. She slipped into the darkness. The hallway was tight, choked with cobwebs. She moved, silent as smoke, until she reached the far end, a simple, unpainted plank door. She could hear voices from the other side. Crows. "And the judge gets here in the morning. The books have to be perfect. Orrin, perfect." Rowena waited, her heart a slow, steady drum. She heard a chair scrape, and the voices moved farther away, into Crow's main office. She tried the handle, locked. She pulled one of her father's tools, a thin, flexible metal shim, from her pouch. She slid it into the gap, felt for the simple latch, and applied steady pressure. With a soft, oiled snick, the lock slid back. She was in. The registrar's office was dark, but the connecting door to Crow's office was open a crack, casting a thin blade of light across the floor. She could hear Crow and Bale still talking. She pulled her small lantern, its sides baffled with tin to cast only a pinprick of light, and found the registrar's desk, and on it, the prize, the heavy, leather-bound county ledger. She opened it. Her fingers, stained with grease and soot, were impossibly delicate as they turned the pages. She found the section for Elder Hollow Ridge. It was all there. A series of entries, dated 2 days prior. The original homesteader's claim, filed 1876. And beside it, a new entry, claim forfeit, non-payment of taxes. And on the next line, new claim filed, Gallows Sons Mining. The ink was still fresh, the signature of Marcus, the registrar, a spidery, terrified scrawl. Rowena pulled out her notebook and began to copy, her own handwriting a perfect, precise mirror of the entries. She finished, but something else caught her eye, a file folder on the corner of the desk, stamped with the Gallows Sons name. She slid it open. It wasn't just the spring. Her blood went cold. It was a preliminary contract, a contingency agreement. It stated that upon the foreclosure and public auction of the Twin Spur Ranch, an event clearly planned for Gallows Sons would purchase the entire property, including the valuable Badwater Creek frontage, for a price that was an insult, 1/10 of its value. And at the bottom, supervising the entire agreement, was the signature, L. Crow, Territorial Sheriff. It was the same arrogant, slanted signature she had seen in her mind 1,000 times. The one on the bribe envelope Bale had passed to Marcus. She had him. She was copying the signature when the voices in the next room stopped. "I'll get the file myself." Crow's voice boomed. A chair scraped. Footsteps. Coming this way. Rowena doused her lantern, grabbed her notebook, and melted into the deep shadow behind a tall, metal filing cabinet. The door burst open. Sheriff Crow filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the light. "Marcus, that little fool," he muttered, stalking to the desk. He was looking for the file. Rowena could smell his cigar smoke, hear the jingle of his spurs. He was 3 feet from her. He rummaged through the papers, growled in frustration. "Orrin, get in here." As Orrin entered, Rowena knew this was her only chance. While both men were at the desk, their backs to her, she slid from behind the cabinet and back through the door she had picked, pulling it softly shut. She didn't wait to see if they heard. She ran, silent, down the dark, dusty hallway. She reached the saloon, her heart hammering. She pushed the false panel, and a man's voice, drunk and confused, said, "Tamsin, what in blazes?" A heavy-set miner, looking for the latrine, had stumbled backstage. He saw Tamsin, her face pale, standing by the open, impossible doorway in the piano closet. He grabbed her arm. "What kind of secret?" Tamsin screamed. A short, sharp cry of genuine fear. Rowena heard it. She was trapped in the hall. Crow would hear it. She looked up. A small, square ventilation grate, clogged with dust, led to the roof. She put 2 fingers to her lips and blew a whistle, sharp and piercing as a hawk's cry. In the alley. Asher heard the scream and the whistle in the same second. His act began. "My wagon!" he roared, his voice filled with fake panic. "The chuck, it slipped!" He kicked the block of wood from under the broken wheel. The heavy wagon, loaded with sand-filled barrels, groaned and rolled, crashing with the sound of a small explosion into the brick wall of the saloon's back room. Barrels toppled, wood splintered, and men inside shouted in shock. The chaos was total. The drunk miner, startled, let go of Tamsin and ran toward the sound of the crash. Tamsin didn't hesitate. She slammed the false panel shut, locked the closet, and ran onto the main stage, feigning panic at the crash. In the hall, Rowena didn't wait. She jammed her boot into the vent grate, kicking it clean out. She scrambled up, through the narrow opening, and onto the flat, tar paper roof of the saloon. Below her, the alley was chaos. Asher was yelling at the saloon owner. The front doors of the sheriff's office burst open. Crow and Bale running out, their guns drawn, trying to find the source of the emergency. Rowena didn't run. She walked, her boots silent on the soft tar. A ghost in the moonlight. She crossed 3 rooftops, dropped into the dark alley behind the depot, and was back in her attic room before the first barrel of sand had been cleared from the alley. An hour later, as the false dawn turned the sky gray, they met Rowena, Asher, and a pale, shaking Tamsin. Rowena laid her notebook on the table, the copied ledger entries, the details of the Gallo Sons contract, and the copied signature of L. Crow. She sketched, from memory, the signature she had seen on the bribe envelope. They were identical. "He's a fool," Rowena said, her voice cold. "He uses the same pen for his crimes and his contracts. It's still our word against his," Asher said, though his eyes were lit with a new, fierce hope. "He'll say we're the forgers." "The seal," Rowena said. She pointed to a detail in her notes. "He stamped the contract with the official Dakota Territorial Office seal, but it was a bad copy. I've seen the real one on manifests. On the real seal, the eagle's left wing is sharp. On this one, it was blurred. The feather's thick. It's a fake." Tamsin nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Marcus told me. Crow threatened the blacksmith. Had a duplicate seal forged 3 months ago. He said it was for embossing." "That's it," Rowena said. She walked to the small telegraph key in the depot office, an instrument she knew as well as her gun. "This closes the loop. I know a man in Bismarck, a private detective. He'll get us a press copy of the real seal." Her fingers began to tap, the sharp, electric clicks cutting through the morning silence. A new kind of weapon, sending a new kind of bullet, racing down the iron wire. The evidence was closing. The telegram was sent. The reply had come back. A simple, coded confirmation of seal received. Article follows. J.P. J.P. was Josiah Pike, Amon's brother, a private investigator in Bismarck with a long memory and a deep hatred of official corruption. The proof was on its way, due to arrive on the morning stage, the same day as the auction. The wait was the hardest part. 2 days, 48 hours. Copper Butte felt like a boiler about to burst. The air was no longer just hot, it was heavy, vibrating with a tension that made men snap at each other in the street. The laughter in the Tin Locust was gone, replaced by low, nervous murmuring. Everyone could feel the presence of the half-dozen new, hard-eyed men who had ridden into town. They didn't work, they didn't mix. They sat on the saloon porch, their chairs tilted back, their hands never far from their guns. They were Crow's men, Gallo and Sons' private enforcers, and they made no secret of it. For Rowena and Asher, the waiting was a strange, suspended time. The night by the creek had changed them. There was a new, fragile intimacy, a shared understanding that made the long hours of work in the depot yard almost bearable. They spoke in the shorthand of allies, a nod, a shared glance, a hand brushing his as she passed him a tally sheet. Then, on the day before the auction, the boiler cracked. The rumor started at the well, spread to the mercantile. and hit the freight depot by noon. Sloan, the freight boss, spat a stream of tobacco, his face a mask of disappointment. Heard it from Billy, who heard it from the registrar, Sloan said, not looking at Rowena, just at the ground. Asher Cole. He caved. Seen leaving Crow's office this morning. Signed a paper. Sold off the eastern pasture, the part that borders the creek. He took Crow's money. Rowena froze. The crate she was tallying blurred. That's a lie, she said, her voice flat. I don't know, Sloan said, shaking his head. Man's got a burned-down barn. He's got a herd he can't move. Sometimes a man's got to save a piece of his life, even if it means selling his soul. The words hit Rowena like a physical blow. Sold his soul. It was a betrayal. It made their stand at the ruined barn, their shared defiance, a lie. It made the kiss by the creek, his story of his wife's promise, a disgusting, cynical manipulation. She felt a hot, sick shame rise in her throat. She had been a fool, softened by a sad story and a moment of weakness. She dropped her tally book and walked out of the yard. She didn't run. Her stride was cold, measured, and terrifying. She found him at the burned-out ranch, standing where the stable had been, a shovel in his hand. He was sifting through the last of the ashes, his face grim. You sold it, she said. Her voice, coming from behind him, made him jump. He turned, and his face lit up for a half-second when he saw her. The light died when he saw her expression. It was a face he'd never seen, a mask of cold, personal fury. Rowena, what? The eastern pasture, Badwater Creek. You signed a paper. You took his money. It was not a question. It was an execution. Asher's face went pale. Who told you that? So it's true. She let out a laugh, but it was the same rusty, mirthless sound she'd made by the creek, only this time it was filled with acid. All of it, the decent house, the promise, your wife's memory. It was all just a performance to get me to do your dirty work, to get me to fight for you, while you were already cutting a deal. No, he shouted, throwing the shovel down. Rowena, that's not what happened. It's not. I saw your face that night, she spat, jabbing a finger at him. The man who hated the fight, the man who just wanted peace. You're a liar, Asher. You're worse than Crow. At least he wears his greed on the outside. Rowena, listen to me. He grabbed her arms, forcing her to face him. She was rigid, her body vibrating with rage. Yes, I went to his office. Yes, I signed a paper. God, I'm a fool. I thought I was being clever. Her eyes narrowed. What paper? A letter of intent, he said, the words rushing out. Crow. He's been pressuring me. He sent one of his new men with an offer this morning. An official offer? In front of witnesses to buy the eastern pasture. A good faith gesture before the auction. And you took it. I signed it, he said, his voice desperate. Don't you see it was a trap? But I thought I could turn it. I signed it. A letter of intent. It's not a deed. It's not binding. I did it to make him overconfident. I did it so he would bring that letter to the auction tomorrow, to show Judge Pike what a fair man he is. And when he does, in front of the whole town, in front of the judge, I'll call him a liar. I'll show them the real contract, the one you found. The one that gives my whole ranch to Gallo and Sons. He was breathing hard, his eyes pleading. It was a plan, Rowena, a stupid one. Maybe, but it was my plan. She stared at him, the rage in her chest slowly being replaced by a cold, different kind of hurt. You did this alone. You went behind my back. After everything, I did it to protect you, he cried, and the words were the worst possible thing he could have said. She ripped her arms from his grasp. Protect me. Yes, Crow. He's watching you. He knows you're not just a depot hand. If he thought for 1 second that we were partners in this, that you were the one who broke into his office, that you were the one with the proof, he wouldn't just try to frame you, Rowena. He'd put a bullet in your back. I couldn't let that happen. I had to make him think I was alone, that I was weak, that I was handling this. She stood there, the silence stretching, colder than the wind. He had meant to save her, but all he'd done was tell her she wasn't his equal. He had put her on the sidelines, like a woman to be protected, not a partner to stand with. "I've had men try to protect me before," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. All the heat gone, leaving only the cold, hard steel beneath. "It got my father killed." She turned. "You didn't protect me, Asher. You just proved you don't trust me. You just made me a target." "Rowena, wait." But she was already walking, her long, fast stride eating up the ground. She didn't look back. She left him standing alone in the ashes of his life. She went to her room, her hands shaking. She grabbed her duster. She checked her gun, and on the small table, she left a piece of paper, the one from her notebook with the copied ledger entries. On the back, she wrote 5 words. "Don't put me behind you again." She saddled her horse and rode out, not west to leave, but north, toward the dam. She needed to see the physical proof of the crime. She needed to be alone, to let the cold rage settle back into the hard, practical lines she understood. She needed to remember who she was before a man with sad eyes had made her forget. The road to Elder Hollow Ridge was empty, the air still. She rode hard, letting the rhythm of the horse clear her head. She was a fool. She had let her guard down. She had let him in, and he had used it to treat her like a child. She was rounding the bend, the one that led to the dam, when they appeared. 3 riders, blocking the path, Deputy Orrin Bale, and the 2 hard-faced men who had ridden with him from the fire. Well, Bale sneered, his confidence high. He wasn't lanky and nervous now. He was backed by muscle. "Look what we have here, the lady laborer, all alone." Rowena reined in her horse, her hand resting on her thigh, inches from her gun. "Get out of my way, Bale." "Oh, the sheriff's gonna want to see you, Miss Hart," Bale said, dismounting. The other 2 fanned out, one moving to her left, one to her right, cutting off her escape. "He's real curious about where you got your employment papers, thinks maybe you're not who you say you are." Bale walked toward her, holding a dirty canvas sack. It clinked. "And we found some misplaced property. Looks like it might have fallen right out of your saddlebag." He opened the sack. Inside were 2 heavy, regulation Army revolvers, their serial numbers filed off, smuggled, stolen guns. They were going to plant them on her, frame her, just as Asher had warned. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. "I'm not holding your trash," Rowena said. "You don't have a choice," Bale said, and he lunged, grabbing for her horse's bridle. "Get her!" The man to her right spurred his horse, drawing his gun. The one to her left dismounted, trying to grab her leg. Rowena moved. She was not a girl to be protected. She was a surgeon. As Bale's hand closed on the bridle, Rowena dropped the reins, her left hand grabbing his wrist. She didn't pull. She locked the joint, pivoted in the saddle, and used his own momentum against him, snapping his wrist back with a force that made the joint pop. Bale screamed, a high, thin sound. The man on her left grabbed for her boot. Rowena didn't hesitate. She kicked, a sharp, forward thrust, her steel-toed boot connecting squarely with his chest. He staggered back, gasping, tripping over a rock. It was 2 seconds of perfect, brutal efficiency. But the third man, the one on the horse, was faster. He had his gun clear. He fired. He wasn't aiming for her. He was aiming for her horse, but she was already moving, and the shot went high, striking the heavy wooden pommel of her saddle. The crack was deafening, and a long, jagged shard of wood, sharp as a knife, ripped from the saddle and tore a red, burning line across her left bicep. The pain was sharp, immediate. Her arm went numb. The man cursed, leveling his gun for a second. Better shot. Crack! A different sound. A rifle. From the ridge above them, the man on the horse cried out, not in pain, but in shock, as a puff of dust exploded at his horse's feet. "Get away from her, Asher." He was on the ridge, his father's hunting rifle at his shoulder. He had seen her ride out. He had read her note. and his heart had stopped. He had tracked her, his horse lathered, his mind filled with a single, terrible, repeating thought. What have I done? The ambush was broken. Bale was clutching his broken wrist. The man on the ground was scrambling for cover. The man on the horse looked at the ridge, at the rifle, and back at Rowena. This wasn't the easy job they were promised. Asher fired again, the bullet whining over their heads. I said, get... They didn't need a third invitation. Bale scrambled onto his horse, his face white with pain. The other two followed, digging their spurs in, riding hell-bent back toward Copper Butte. Asher spurred his horse down the rocky slope, sliding to a stop beside her. His eyes were wide, taking in the scene. He saw her, her face pale, her left hand clutching her bicep, bright red blood welling between her fingers. You're hurt, he said, his voice raw. I told you, she hissed, the pain making her furious. I told you not to. I know, he cut her off, his own face a mask of guilt. God, Rowena, I'm sorry. We can argue later. We have to move. They'll be back, and they'll bring Crow. He looked around, his eyes scanning the terrain. He pointed. There, the old grain silo, off the road. They rode, hard, for the abandoned silo 1/2 mile away. They got the horses inside, the air thick with the smell of dust and ancient, rotten grain. It was dark, save for a few shafts of light streaming in from gaps in the high, conical roof. Let me see, he said, his voice gentle. She let him. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading, the pain throbbing. He helped her off with her duster, his touch careful. The sleeve of her shirt was soaked. It's a gouge, he said, his voice relieved. Deep, but the bullet didn't touch you. It was the wood. He reached into his breast pocket. Rowena flinched. Asher, don't, not. He pulled it out. The simple, clean white handkerchief. The one he had shown her in the depot. His wife's. It's just a cloth, he said softly, echoing her own thoughts. It's a bandage. It's meant to heal. Please. She stopped, her breath catching. He wasn't hiding behind it. He was offering it. He was letting go of the past, using its last, sacred icon to fix the present he had nearly broken. She nodded. Once. His hands were surprisingly steady. He cleaned the wound, his touch firm, and then folded the handkerchief into a thick, tight pad, tying it securely over the cut. The white cotton was a stark, clean promise against her blood-soaked sleeve. He didn't let go of her arm. He held it, his hands covering the bandage, his head bowed. I was a fool, he whispered. I was so afraid of losing you. I acted out of pride. I thought I could. I don't know what I thought. I just know I was wrong. I almost got you killed. Rowena looked down at his hands, covering hers, covering the white cloth. The anger was gone. All of it. All that was left was the throbbing in her arm, and the steady, warm presence of the man beside her. She put her good hand, her right hand, over his. I fight better, she said, her voice quiet but clear in the dusty silence. When I know I'm not fighting alone. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He squeezed her hand. Never again, Rowena. I swear it. Never behind you, always beside you. They sat in silence, a new, stronger truce settling over them. Then, a sound from the road. Hoofbeats. A lot of them. Asher moved to the gap in the silo wall. He looked out, his body tensing. Rowena joined him. It was Crow, riding at the head of a column. Bale was with him, his arm in a crude sling. The two ambushers were there, and behind them, at least 4 new men. Men with rifles in their saddle scabbards and hard, blank faces. They weren't townsfolk. They were riders. They were an army. He's not waiting, Asher said, his voice grim. He's not waiting for the auction. He's not waiting for the judge. Rowena watched the column ride into Copper Butte, a wave of imported violence. No, she said, the cold, practical certainty returning, her hand instinctively checking the gun at her hip. He's here to finish it. The sun rose on the day of the auction, painting the sky in shades of pale, sickly yellow. The square, usually empty at this hour, was already filling, but the crowd was not festive. They were hemmed in by Crow's new men, who stood at all four corners of the square, rifles held casually, but ready. In the center of the square, a raw pine podium had been erected. At 9 o'clock, Sheriff Leland Crow stepped onto it. He was not in his usual frock coat. He wore a dark, military-style shirt, his badge pinned over his heart and strapped across his chest, gleaming with brass, was a bandolier full of rifle cartridges. He looked like a man expecting a war, or starting one. He held up a hand for silence. "People of Copper Butte," he boomed, his voice unnervingly cheerful. "You are here to witness an act of progress, a public auction of territorial land, all legal, all proper, and—" He smiled, his eyes scanning the crowd. "You are here to witness an act of justice." He pointed, not at the land office, but at the charred remains of the Twin Spur Ranch, visible on the North Road. Last night, after refusing a generous offer, this office uncovered a plot of arson, of fraud, and of violent resistance against the law, perpetrated by a desperate man. He was setting the stage, trying his case before the crowd. "Where is Asher Cole?" he demanded. "Right here, Sheriff." Asher's voice, clear and steady, cut through the square. A path opened in the crowd. Asher walked through it, his face clean, his hat set, his eyes locked on Crow. And at his side, her left arm in a clean white sling made from a handkerchief, her right hand resting near her hip, was Rowena Hart. They stopped at the foot of the podium. The crowd held its breath. "Well," Crow sneered, "the arsonist and his hired gun, how convenient. Orrin, arrest this man." Deputy Bale, his own arm in a sling, stepped forward with two of the new gunmen, his good hand reaching for a set of irons. "On what charge?" A new voice, sharp and aged, cracked through the tension. A buckboard had arrived. Unnoticed, an old man, ramrod straight, in a black suit, stepped down. He held a leather satchel. "On what charge?" "Sheriff Crow, you cannot arrest a man for the crime of being burned out of his home." Crow's face tightened. "Judge Pike, you're early. The law is never early. Sheriff, it is merely present," Judge Amos Pike said, walking to the podium. He had no relation to Amon, but he had the same unbending spine. "I am here to oversee this auction. I will see the paperwork, all of it, the original deeds, the forfeiture notices, and the new claims. Now." Crow's smile became a thin, hard line. This was not his plan. "The paperwork is in order, Judge, but we have a more pressing matter. Asher Cole is under arrest. He and this woman attacked my deputies yesterday with intent to kill." "That's a lie," Asher said. "They ambushed us." "Proof, Mr. Cole," Crow mocked. "Or just your word?" "More than my word," Asher said. He looked at Rowena. She stepped forward. The pain in her arm was a dull, hot throb, but it focused her. It made her cold. She reached into her duster with her good hand and pulled out the small, oilskin-wrapped packet of evidence. She placed it on the podium, at the judge's feet. "Here's the proof, Judge," she said, her voice carrying across the silent square. Crow's eyes widened, a flicker of true panic. "First," Rowena said, her hand steady, "a charcoal rubbing of the brand on the timber used to bar Mr. Cole's stable door. It matches the brand on your office woodpile." "Stolen," Crow snapped. "Second, a charcoal rubbing of the unique hammer marks used to build the illegal dam on Elder Hollow Ridge. I expect you'll find a matching hammer in your tool shed, the one used to build this very podium." Crow's hand moved, just slightly, toward his gun. "Third," Rowena continued, her voice rising, "my sworn testimony. I overheard you and Deputy Bale planning to file false names before the auction. The name Gallo and Sons." "Lies fantasies," Crow roared. "Fourth." She placed her notebook on the pile. "A hand-copied transcript from the county ledger, made 2 nights ago, showing the illegal transfer of land to Gallo and Sons, and a copy of the contract you signed. selling them the entire Twin Spur ranch, including water rights you do not own. Forgery, Crow yelled, his face turning purple. Is it? Rowena said, her voice like ice. Then you won't mind the judge comparing the seal on your contract to this. She held up the final piece of paper. The telegram from Bismarck. A telegraphic confirmation from the Territorial Marshal's office, sent by investigator Josiah Pike, confirming that the seal used on your Gallo & Sons contract is a known forgery. The real one is on its way. The square was dead silent. The truth was laid bare, a stark, ugly thing on the pine boards. Judge Pike looked at the telegram, then at Crow, his face a mask of cold fury. "Sheriff," he said, his voice damning, "you will surrender your weapon and your office. You are under—" Crow had lost. The law had cornered him, so he fell back on the only law he truly believed in. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You're all fools," he snarled. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at Asher. "This is my town," in one blurred motion. He ripped the heavy pistol from his holster and leveled it. Not at Rowena, but at the unarmed Asher Cole. He was ending the game, destroying the prize. The crowd screamed. Asher froze, his life measured in the black, round hole of the muzzle. Rowena had not moved. She heard the words in her head, the final part of Amon's prayer. Never shoot if there is another way. She looked at Crow's gun, pointed at Asher's heart. There was no other way. The world compressed to the space between them. Crow's finger tightened. Rowena drew. It was not the fast, desperate pull of a brawler. It was the prayer. Draw, lock, breathe, squeeze. Her gun was out, a single, fluid line. Her right arm a steel bar. Ignoring the fire in her left, Crow's pistol flashed. The boom of his heavy Colt echoed across the square. But in the same split second of fire and smoke, Rowena's pistol cracked, a lighter, sharper sound. The bullet from Crow's gun, aimed at Asher's chest, went wide, screaming into the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust. Crow cried out, not in pain, but in sheer, agonizing shock. He stared at his hand. His gun was still there, but it was ruined. The hammer, which had been falling, was shattered, bent back at a grotesque angle. A piece of twisted, smoking metal. Rowena's first shot had hit the hammer. A 1 in 1,000 shot, performed on purpose. A surgeon's cut. She had disarmed him without breaking his skin. Crow stared, uncomprehending. Rowena fired again. Her second shot was just as precise. It did not hit his chest. It hit the brass buckle of the bandolier he wore. The bullet tore the leather strap and the heavy belt of cartridges. His symbol of war ripped free and clattered uselessly to the planks of the podium. 2 shots, 2 disarming blows. Control. Not murder. Now, Asher yelled. Orrin Bale, seeing his boss beaten, lunged, not at Rowena, but at the judge, trying to grab the evidence. Asher was ready. He met the deputy's charge, not with a fist, but with his shoulder, a rancher's tackle that lifted the lanky man clean off his feet. They crashed to the ground. Bale tried to roll, to draw his own gun, but Asher was on him. All his fear and rage focused into one action. He didn't have irons. He grabbed the lariat, the cattle rope, from his belt, and in 3 swift, practiced motions, hog-tied the deputy's hands and feet. The other gunmen, the hard-eyed strangers, raised their rifles. No, Sloan. The freight boss roared, and he and the depot men surged forward. A wave of angry, ordinary citizens, armed with pry bars and axe handles. Not in our town, the gunmen, mercenaries paid to bully, not to fight a whole town, hesitated, their nerve-breaking. Seize that evidence, Judge Pike commanded. This auction is postponed. These men are in my custody. And as if summoned by his words, a new sound entered the square. Hoofbeats, fast, disciplined. A dozen riders, not in ranchers' clothes, but in the blue. Cavalry issue uniforms of the territorial marshals. They parted the crowd, rifles leveled, led by a man with a heavy, gray mustache. "Josiah Pike," Rowena breathed, a wave of relief so strong it almost buckled her knees. "We got your wire, Miss Hart," the lead marshal said, his eyes taking in the scene. "And a second one from your friend in Bismarck. Looks like we got here just in time." He dismounted. "Sheriff Leland Crow, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and high crimes against the territory." It was over. The law, the real law, was here. Crow, his face a mask of disbelief, his gun hand trembling, saw the ring of marshals, the angry town, the bound deputy, and the woman with the smoking pistol who had taken him apart without killing him. He broke. He vaulted off the back of the podium and ran, scrambling for the narrow, dark alley between the saloon and the mercantile. An escape. The marshals raised their rifles. "No!" Rowena shouted. "He's mine!" She ran after him, her boots pounding the dirt. She was in the alley. It was a dead end, blocked by a high fence. Crow was clawing at it, a cornered rat. He spun, his empty hands raised, his face a mask of sweat and terror. Rowena stopped, 10 feet from him. She did not raise her pistol. She just held it, level at her side. "It's over, Crow," she said, her voice echoing in the narrow space. You broke my hand," he whimpered, staring at his useless, trembling fingers. "The law," Rowena said, the words as cold and final as a hammer blow, "is supposed to protect the people with nothing but their hands. You used it to break them." She raised the pistol, the barrel aimed squarely at his chest. "My father died for that law." She saw his eyes. She saw the man from the train, the man with the fox pelts. It was him, the same cold, dead arrogance, now shattered by fear. Crow sank to his knees, his hands held high. Don't shoot! Please, I surrender!" He had given his last word, and from the chapel at the end of the street, the bell began to toll, the high, clear sound of the 10th hour, ringing out over the silent, stunned square. This time, no one was laughing. The Dakota heat did not break, it shattered. 3 days after Crow and his men were led away in chains by the territorial marshals, the sky, which had been a flat, brassy lid, turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind turned cold, and the first fat drops of rain hit the dust, releasing the scent of the earth, a smell of forgiveness. It rained for 4 days, a steady, soaking, life-giving rain. On the 5th day, the sun returned, but its heat was clean, washed of malice, and the water returned. The dam at Elder Hollow Ridge, declared illegal by Judge Pike, was dismantled by the same depot hands who had fought for the town. The water, released from its prison, surged down the old, dry ditch, Badwater Creek, which had been a shallow, muddy crawl, now ran fast and clear, its voice a happy gurgle, its banks turning a tentative green. At the twin spur, the skeleton of the old barn was gone. In its place, a new frame was rising. The sound of hammers echoed across the yard, a sound of construction, not destruction. Sloan, Pike, and the depot crew, paid a fair wage by Asher, were helping him rebuild, working alongside Tamsin Lowe, who was organizing the supplies, and Rowena, who was measuring, sawing, and lifting, her arm, now healed, stronger than before. A new, bright sign, painted by Tamsin, swung in the Breeze Twin Spur Ranch. The entire mood of Copper Butte had shifted. The Tin Locust, once a place of mean whispers, was now just a saloon. Tamsin Lowe, no longer singing of gamblers and lost souls, sat at the piano, her fingers finding a lively, upbeat tune, a ragtime rhythm that made boots tap. Rowena entered, her work done for the day. She was still in her trousers and work shirt, stained with pine tar. She walked to the bar. The men, the same men who had laughed, went quiet, but it was not the silence of mockery. Pike, the burly loader, slid a glass toward her. "On me, Hart," he grunted. "Sarsaparilla, good for the thirst." She nodded, accepting the drink and the respect it carried. A man was waiting for her and Asher at a corner table. Judge Amos Pike. He had stayed an extra week to ensure the transition of law. "The new sheriff arrives tomorrow," he said, pushing a folder across the table. "These are your deeds, Mr. Cole, clean and clear. The territorial office has voided every forged entry." He looked at them both, his stern face softening. Crow was a sickness. He saw the law as a tool to take. "You two, you reminded this town that the law is a tool to protect." He raised his own glass of water. "You kept the water for this town. It's like you saved its heartbeat." The work was hard, but the evenings were theirs. That night, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, the new kitchen wing framed out behind them. The sun was setting, a spectacular fire of orange and deep red over the now green ridges. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade. Asher had been quiet, turning a small object over in his hands. I found this," he said, his voice hesitant. He opened his palm. It was a ring, not a diamond, not gold. It was a simple, heavy band of unadorned silver, rough, as if hammered by a blacksmith, not a jeweler. "It was in a small box of my father's things," Asher said, not looking at her. It's not a question. Rowena, not yet. It's not a chain." He finally met her eyes, his own gaze clear and vulnerable. "It's just an invitation to stay, to see this barn finished, to see the kitchen finished, if you want it." Rowena looked at the ring. It was simple, strong, and honest. It was like the land. It was like him. She didn't speak. She held out her left hand, her palm up. Her hand was not the hand of a lady. It was scarred, calloused, the knuckles skinned from work. He took her hand, his own rough, and slid the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit, a cool, solid weight. They stood, the air growing chill. The light was gone. "It's getting cold," he said. The fires lit in the kitchen. They went inside. The main room of the ranch house was still empty, filled with shadows. But the kitchen, the heart of the house, was warm. A big fire crackled in the hearth, the one he had built for Sarah, the one that now belonged to them. The light played over the simple wood table, the copper pots, the smell of wood smoke and the coffee they had brewed. Rowena stood by the fire, warming her hands, the silver ring catching the light. Asher came up behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his presence, his warmth. She turned. She looked at his face, the lines of weariness now softened by peace. He looked at her, at the woman who had saved his life, his ranch, and his soul. The space between them closed. He put his hands on her waist, drawing her in. She went, without resistance, her own hands finding their place on his shoulders. This was not the desperate, clinging embrace by the creek. This was a choice. This was an arrival. He held her tight, a solid, encompassing embrace that spoke of safety and home. Rowena let out a long, slow breath and let her head rest, her forehead pressing into the warm, rough wool of his shirt, just over his heart. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, strong beat. His hand came up, not with passion, but with a deep, profound respect, and settled on her back, his fingers spread wide, just holding her, grounding her. He tilted her chin up. The kiss that followed was deep, deeper than the one at the creek. It was a kiss of knowledge, of acceptance. It was a slow, sure exploration, a promise. Her lips parted under his, and his breath quickened, a soft, shared sound in the quiet room. Her hand slid from his shoulder to the back of his neck, her fingers lacing into his hair, holding him as he was holding her. His work jacket, rough and smelling of pine sawdust, felt too heavy, a barrier. He shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor, and pulled her closer, his arms now around her, skin to shirt, the warmth of his body seeping into hers. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, a long unspoken need, yet still gentle, still patient. They heard it at the same time, the sound that had started their new life, rain, a sudden, soft drumming on the new shingles of the roof. They broke the kiss, but did not move apart. They were breathless, foreheads touching, a shared smile in the firelight. He looked at her, his eyes dark, his voice thick. "Tomorrow," he whispered. She finished the thought, her own voice soft. "Tomorrow, we'll keep building the barn and the future." The future began the next morning, in the depot yard. Rowena Hart stood before a small, nervous group. Tamsin Lowe, the baker's wife, and 3 of the depot men's daughters. "This," Rowena said, holding up her gun belt, "is not a toy, and it's not a solution. It is the last, final, and most terrible word. You should spend your whole life trying not to use it." She was holding her first class, gun safety and self-defense. She did not teach them to be fast. She taught them to be safe. She taught them Amon's prayer draw, lock, breathe, squeeze. And then she taught them what she had done to Orrin Bale, how to use an attacker's wrist against them, how to disarm a man without firing a shot. The town of Copper Butte had changed its story. The tale of the new depot hand was now told in the Tin Locust with a kind of communal pride. They still said. They laughed when she asked for work, but now they finished it with a nod of respect. Until she outdrew the sheriff and saved the whole damn town. The news from Bismarck was final. Leland Crowe, faced with the forged seal, the testimony of Judge Pike, and the full, terrified confession of Orrin Bale, was indicted on 17 counts. Bale, in exchange for his testimony, received a 5-year sentence. Crowe was facing 20. The Gallo & Sons Mining Company, exposed and disgraced, had its charter revoked by the territory. The threat was over. Copper Butte was free. It was spring. The new barn was finished, the paint drying, the stalls filled with new horses. The cattle, fat and healthy from a season of clear water, were ready for the drive to Bismarck. Asher and Rowena walked, not to the porch, but down to the bank of Badwater Creek. The grass was high, dotted with yellow wildflowers. Asher carried a wooden stake and a hammer. Rowena carried a simple, carved piece of plank wood. He drove the stake into the rich, dark earth, right by the water's edge. She held up the sign, and he nailed it fast. It wasn't a deed or a claim, it was a statement. It read, "Home is where we earn a fair day's work." They stood back, their work done. Asher, the rancher who had found his fight. Rowena, the fighter who had found her home. He took her hand. The silver ring on her finger felt warm, a permanent part of her. They looked at the water, flowing free and clean. They didn't need to speak of love. They had built it, piece by piece, from the ground up, with labor, with trust, and with the hard, shared choice of doing what was right, instead of what was easy. Thank you for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, and let's connect. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video. And give us extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more folks.